Welcome back to the Agile Accountant and the second of our discussions with Dean Latchana on Agile and on innovation accounting. In our first episode, we discussed getting finance teams involved with Agile and what Dean's advice was for that, and that was extremely interesting. And I think that will lead us very nicely into this chat about innovation accounting. So Alistair and I are both qualified accountants. We like numbers and cash flows and discounted cash flows and all that sort of thing. Innovation accounting is not strictly financial, is it, Dean? So tell us a bit more.
Absolutely. Yes. So thank you for having me back again for the second episode. I think where I'd like to start is a couple of steps back before hitting on innovation accounting. And where I'd like to start is just with a quote from a gentleman called Jack Welch, who people know their corporate history, was the CEO of General Electric probably about 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Opinions on him are varied, let's say, but there's a particular quote which I quite like. He says that if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. So I'll say that again. If the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. So the ability for an organization to adapt and innovate and maybe even entertain a degree of creative destruction needs to be at least at the rate, if not greater, than the external rate of change. However, there's a challenge. And that is sometimes described as the innovator's dilemma, where many organizations at the start of their existence has kind of bootstrapped their way into being. And it tends to be with a band of corporate mavericks who are comfortable with complexity, uncertainty, and rapid change. And I tend to emphasize exploration, learning and growth, being able to adapt or kill off ideas or concepts really rapidly through customer and stakeholder feedback. Those things are really hard to measure. They tend to necessitate end-to-end collaboration, maybe even genuine partnering with customers. And the individuals who are part of these startups or scale-ups are driven by intrinsic motivation. And if this organization succeeds into a proper grown-up organization, which may be in existence for years or decades, and starts to employ thousands and tens of thousands of individuals, the nature of the organization changes necessarily into one which is more operational. And I come on to innovation accounting a bit, because I know that's what's in our mind, but there is relevance here. So I've described the entrepreneurial system, and if the organization succeeds, they begin to formalize procedures and expectations, and business functions through necessity begins to emerge. Success within those particular silos, are easier to measure. The incentives begin to change more towards extrinsic motivation. The characteristics of people within these business functions tend to prefer things which are familiar, routine, predictable, and known. They emphasize things such as maintenance and improvement, continuous improvement, and maybe revenue, cash flow, being able to squeeze more profit out of ever smaller margins. But the challenge is the operational system tends to stifle the emergence or the existence of the entrepreneurial system, because the two different worlds have got different characteristics. They're trying to emphasize different things. But in a fast changing world, the operational system needs to have the entrepreneurial system to be able to review and, with a degree of passion, be able to turn off or turn down or even replace products and services that are no longer right for the market or no longer a strategic fit. Okay. But in order for the entrepreneurs, those innovators, to be able to scale the right things, what the operational system is trying to succeed, they just don't marry together. So this is where innovation accounting begins to come into the picture, in that the operational system tends to want to look for revenue, look for guaranteed customers, some return on investment, extremely protective, I would say, over capital expenditure, which is rightly so. But the innovators are looking for different indicators of success. They're looking for customer behavior. They're looking for early signs that they're winning. They're looking for a problem solution fit. On of the ideas that are right, they're going to see, can we actually scale this thing carefully and judiciously? So that suggests a product market fit. Is this what customer segments is this right for? Does it solve their problems? Can we carefully operationalize this? But the financial colleagues may be looking for that kind of revenue. So this is where innovation accounting comes in, because through early incremental successes, we can begin to see perhaps some predictive cash flow as a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator. So we want to do innovation incremental in a particular product or service, and then if it scales to the right level, begin to see, are we beginning to turn the dial on through some incremental capital expenditure, some revenue that we hope to be able to bank and scale.
Yeah.
So just one more thing before I pause. So I spoke about an experience at a UK grocery retailer. We would normally do this in a small number of stores of different trade intensity. So could this be operational at different trade intensity, different customer segments, and are we beginning to, at the right time, beginning to get the right revenue? And does it kind of, as I use this phrase in the first episode, begin to wash its own face? Does it pay for itself? Does it integrate well with other operations and other kind of financial ambitions? So that's a introduction into innovation accounting and why it's so important for incumbent organizations.
Okay, so we start to get a good feel about part of a project and we maybe expand the experiment. What if we get a bad feel about part of a project, but it's only been a short experiment? How do we know it's not going to work or is going to work?
Yeah. Thinking about a complexity thought leader called Mary Allbean. She talks about complexity in a sense similar to what I've shared already, in that there is the entrepreneurial system and the operational system within many incumbent organizations. As I said before, the operational system tends to stifle the emergence or the regaining of the entrepreneurial muscle within incumbent organizations. But she talks about something called an adaptive space, where those two different worlds come together. And as I said in the first episode, we need to create the conditions, and leaders tend to need to go first in this, where we put our cards on the table, we have professional but challenging conversations, perhaps with some operators or some innovators, to be able to review the success of a portfolio of innovations. And we make pivot and persevere decisions of whether we almost like Dragon's Den or Shark Tank for our US listeners, where we review whether we need this particular innovation has got early signs of success, which deserves some further investment, or whether we need to pivot to try a different approach, or whether we need to pull the plug. I call it the 3 Ps. Persevere, pivot, or pull the plug. And we do that collectively in this adaptive space made up of those innovators and those operators. And then we might get some leading and lagging indicators. So a leading indicator might be the number of transactions, the number of returning customers, the number of failure there may be. So we need opposing metrics as well. So those who listened to the first episode, I spoke about an example of this particular retailer innovating with customers being able to pay using Apple Pay by scanning the barcode of products. There was a fear of shrink increasing, which is a theft of stores where customers pretending to pay something, but they're not. They're just walking out the store with something after pretending to scan something and pay for it. That is a metric that we want to follow. So we bring this into the room and we review it every 2 weeks or every month or whatever a decent cadence is, to be able to bring those people together, including those from finance, to see whether we need to pivot or persevere.
Yeah.
So that those are the magical moments where a particular innovation lives or dies, or whether if it does die out, perhaps we refocus the team's effort on the next class or next opportunity to pursue.
Within this, Dean, this is absolutely brilliant, fascinating stuff. Within this, one of the two thoughts comes to my head. One of them is, how do you stop the operational part of the business, which is, generating the money now, generating the profits now, paying everyone's salaries, etc. How do you stop them from stopping poo-pooing the innovations that are going on, with the ideas that are being generated, and because they are trying to maybe, I don't know, protect their own fiefdoms, or they themselves, because of their mindset and their way of thinking, can't see what the innovators can see. I thought it was two questions. It's one question.
Yeah, it's fine. I think we need to recognize that not all people are traveling in the same direction, and even if they're aware, they're not traveling at the same speed. So what I mean by that is that there are people who are naturally wedded and conservative and find success and reward at repeating and operationalizing and continuously improving existing products and services. That's great. That is the cash cow. That's what's generating the revenue. But as I said before, with a fast-moving world with increasing competition, the risk is that an organization operating just on that after a number of years is going to get undercut by a number of different organizations entering the market. There are other individuals, perhaps, who tend to be operational, who appreciate the need to diversify a portfolio of products and services, and they may be a little bit more open to enter into that adaptive space where the entrepreneurs are bringing to the operational colleagues new things that could be scaled. The examples that I've seen is where the transformation director has recognized that the innovation teams might need to welcome some operators into that adaptive space, but actually shield and give air cover to those operators who are really conservative and may try and throw a spanner in the works.
Sure.
And I've seen it where transformation directors say, do not speak to these area managers. I will speak to these area managers and my leadership team will. You speak to one of these two area managers and this group of store managers, because I know they have an aptitude, you called it, Alistair, a mindset where they do want to innovate. And they know they need to innovate for their very own survival as well, to be successful in their career and organization, to thrive and survive.
Because I think that's the thing that we're trying to avoid always, is waiting until it's a crisis, and waiting until then, look, we've just lost all this revenue, all this money, and now we have to change. And it's sort of helping people understand that if we can incrementally change, like I think of the two books come to mind immediately there. One is Who Moved My Cheese? Those of us old enough to remember that one. And then something which came after that was Our Iceberg is Melting. Two books really saying the same thing, is if you don't keep looking for the next thing, if you just try and sit back on your laurels, you don't look for the next thing, you will eventually be sitting on an iceberg which melts. And I think what you described there is the different mindsets, the different types of people, the different psychologies are described really well in the second book, in The Iceberg is Melting, and it talks about those who want to do their different things, and certainly something for us to come back to later. But no, thank you for that. That helps us understand it. I wonder how much you mentioned this in the first episode, where if you can get leadership, if you can get the top down to support this process, you're more likely to succeed than not. And I wonder within this place, how important is it for the leadership, be it the financial leadership, be it the leadership of the company, to be supporting this marrying of the conversations between the two categories of folk in the organization?
Yes, it's a must-have requirement for this to truly take root. I would say there are other conditions or realities as well could catalyze this change and give it the best opportunity to be incubated.
Mm-hmm.
And this relates to an organizational psychologist, his work, Ron Westrum, who some listeners may be familiar with. And he spoke about, he did a study, and he was able to categorize organizations into 3 psychological types: pathological, bureaucratic, and generative. And this is based on the conditions in which information flows in organizations, how, without necessarily changing the organizational structure and the different silos and business functions, how well can someone from the marketing team speak to someone in finance, or for someone from finance to speak in R&D, or whatever it might be. The more people feel safe to share something and show that ability to learn and have a degree of vulnerability and protection, the more people can raise a flag or suggest a piece of innovation. So that's another condition, which is absolutely essential alongside leadership, genuine leadership sponsorship, not just lip service or a set of corporate values and visions, which everyone has to attend and listen to at a town hall, which goes on the internet site or get printed out on the wall and stack up on blue tack on the side of an office partition wall. So I'm being a bit disparaging here, but I've been around the world a few times, seeing how organizations fail at doing genuine leadership sponsored transformation. So just to answer your question, yes, leadership is critical, genuine leadership sponsorship, and they themselves need to go on their own personal change journey, I would wager, but also that cultural reality in which organizations are in, whether, as Westrum has recognized, whether it's bureaucratic, pathological, or generative, which I can go into a bit more if you like.
Yeah, and in a way, organizations need to have both skill sets. They need to be innovative to develop new opportunities, but they also need to be a bit bureaucratic, I don't know if that's the right word, in order, once those opportunities become a real thing, become worthwhile, they need to create efficient processes, business processes, finance processes, to kind of embed those within the organization and make them into the next cash cows. So you kind of need both.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. It's the right process at the right time.
Yeah.
With the right people being able to back them, but importantly, be able to alter. It's almost as if I think policies and procedures should have an expiration date, a shelf life, where after a certain number of months, let's automatically review whether this is actually doing the right thing for our customers and colleagues. And this is, if you think about the book by Sidney Dekker, a book called Human Error, he talks about something called policy drift, where great minds in an organization have come together to design and implement and roll out some kind of policy. Let's suppose that policy or that procedure is right. You could have individuals in an organization who do the thing right, they follow the procedure right, but that might not necessarily be the right thing to do. So this might happen in healthcare as well, particularly, let's say, nursing, where the ward may be following procedure and policy strictly, but there may be exceptional cases and increasingly more cases where doing the thing right might not be the right thing to do. And so this introduces policy drift, as Sidney Dekker would say. And we need to be really, really careful as managers and leaders on that, to support the people to do the right thing. And these poor individuals have a degree of risk taking. They say they're doing this, but really they're doing something else because they're trying to do the right thing for the patient.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Brilliant.
And how, as a management team, do we balance that mismatch, though? We do need procedures in order to be efficient, but we also need to have the flexibility to realize that not every customer, not every client is exactly the same, and their needs may be slightly different. And we need to feel empowered to kind of serve them in a slightly different way.
Yeah. It brings to mind two different mindsets that we may, one of which we may have a tendency towards when facing complex work.
Yes.
It could be one where we see the world in an ordered way, or we may see the world in an adaptive way. An ordered way is that we may tend to fall on previous success and patterns of behavior and have false certainty over, if we do something like we did last year or 5 years ago, we're going to get the same outcome.
Yeah.
Which may be right for conditions which haven't changed significantly. But as I say, in this episode and previous episode, the world is changing at an ever increasing rate. The clock cycle of change is accelerating. So we may need to entertain a different outlook and mindset when it comes to complex situations, where we need to have an adaptive space where we might raise a hand as a leader or a manager, say, I just don't know. But collectively, I'd like to explore with my colleagues and perhaps the right customers what the best way in which we can recognize and align to what new value may be. So it's how do we present ourselves in a complex and challenging world collectively as a team or as an organization, ideally led by a leader.
Okay. And just to bring our discussion on innovation accounting to a close, are there any books or other resources that you would suggest to listeners that might want to explore this further?
Yes, thank you. Innovation accounting is a phrase coined by Eric Ries.
I've heard of him.
Yes,
he's the lean startup or something, is he not?
He is indeed. Yes, that's what he's famed for. A book which is probably about 12, 15 years old now.
Yeah.
And it really was a revelation to me. A more recent book is called The Startup Way, which is, the strapline is how entrepreneurial managers transform culture and drives growth. So this is really directed more towards existing incumbent corporations, whereas the lean startup was more around startups.
Yeah, startups.
Essentially. Yeah.
And does he talk about finance, though? I mean, here's the key question for the Agile Accountant. These books often talk about strategy and fancy things, but what about finance?
Yes. I've read it a few years ago, and I believe it does talk about the importance of finance and how finance can appreciate and support those who are trying to innovate and so forth.
Any other resources, any websites that are promoting this, that sort of thing, any articles?
Yes, well, funny you should say that, because something that some listeners may be aware of is that I'm the editor of a print-only publication called the Agilist, which is designed for, it's almost a digest of different thought leaders around the world, and it gets collated every month and distributed. It's non-profit, and the mission of the Agilist is to help individuals and organizations respond to a rapidly changing world. So perhaps in the description of this podcast, we could put a link into it and people can check it out. And if they'd like to, they can subscribe to it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good. Alistair, any last words from you?
No, I think that just to say thank you so much. This is such a rich, content-rich podcast, Dean. Thank you so much for this. There's a lot that we want to, delve into. A lot of ideas coming to my head, a lot of questions, a lot of thoughts. And I think once we've sort of explored some of these materials that you have suggested and thought more deeply on what you've been saying, my only next thought is whether we could invite you back for us to dive a little bit deeper when Ross and I have had the chance to come up with some intelligent sounding questions to drive you down to the nut of it, but as it were, because there's so much there, and it's been so interesting. And you've been so incredibly articulate and diverse in how you've been bringing the different ideas together. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, which is why I haven't been saying so much in this podcast, just listening.
A final 2 sentences from you then, Dean, in terms of summarizing innovation accounting, what it means for finance people and organizations more widely.
Yeah, my final closing remarks is that how might we create an environment where it's safe to learn and challenge assumptions and get early feedback to determine whether we are investing our talent and energy in the right pursuits, and doing that collectively and honestly in a safe environment is really, really important.
That's lovely. That's a lovely closing sentence. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you from Alistair and myself. This is the Agile Accountants. That was Dean Latchana. And I think innovation accounting is something that we can all explore a bit further. Thank you.
Thank you.